What's up, people? True Techno Gamer here, and thought I'd do a little change of scenery. So I'm downstairs in the theater room basement rec space and bringing you another home theater related talk. I had an interesting experience yesterday that I thought it'd be cool to share for all of you home theater enthusiasts, and particularly those that are into hi-fi audio. Before I get into it, please like, subscribe to the channel. Give me some comments. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know if you find this interesting. Let me know your thoughts on these high-end speakers that I'm going to discuss and what other speakers you may be looking into. So hope you enjoy the channel. So let's get into it. So yesterday I had an opportunity. I set up an appointment to go to Overture Ultimate Home Audio. This is a high-end audio store out in Delaware. And I know if you're following home theater, following high-end audio especially, you've heard of Overture. The speakers that I auditioned were the Parasound Persona 5Fs, because I'm actually more interested in the 7F, which is a step up. It's the larger speaker that has bigger woofers, bigger cabinets for a bigger sound stage. I also listen to the Focal Sopra line, which is a great speaker. I've listened to that several times in the past. He had the N2, so I listened to the N2, which is the smaller floor standing speaker. I also got a chance to listen to like I mentioned, the Akora Acoustics SRC1, and then I listened to the Magico A5, which is a kind of the new hotness. Magico is kind of entry-level floor standing. Magico is a really premium brand, and in the past, you know, their lines of speakers started at like the 30,000 plus range, you know, and to start, and they kind of go up to like six figures. So the A5 is kind of an attempt to bring it down a little bit and make it a little bit more accessible, which has been working. It's been getting kind of great praise and getting a lot of traction around the industry. So I listened to the A5, which is the higher end floor standing model there. And then finally, I got a chance to listen to the B&W Diamond D4. Now, that's the brand new Diamond series B&W speakers that came out in September. So a great sampling of speakers, some high-end stuff, all fairly competitive, all kind of within the general same price points. So a little bit more about those speakers. So some of you guys may know the Parasound 5F, the configuration is, it has a 1-inch beryllium tweeter. And what is unique to Parasound Personas is that it also uses a beryllium mid-range, which is pretty unique. And the 5F is configured with 3 7-inch woofers, right? So it's meant to be, you know, give you a pretty full range sound, but it's definitely not, you know, full range. You would want to have a subwoofer in general with that. So that's the Paradigm. The Sopra, the Focal Sopra N2 uses, again, a beryllium 1-inch beryllium tweeter. Again, at this price point, you're going to start to see beryllium kind of used for the tweeter, which is arguably the best material you can have for a tweeter. It's a really expensive thing to manufacture, so you don't usually see it until you get to a certain price point. But yeah, that 10 to 30,000 range, you're going to start seeing a ton of beryllium, diamond, and more kind of exotic materials like that. Just saying. But Focal uses beryllium tweeter, and then they have as well I think a 7-inch mid-range, and then 2 7-inch woofers, 2 versus the 3 in the Paradigm. That's important. Then the Akora was really interesting, right? So the reason why Dave wanted me to listen to it is because it's a fairly unique speaker in terms of the cabinet and the enclosure. It's made of a rock material. It's super solid, meant to be really rigid. But the setup was for the SRC1. It actually just uses a 1-inch silk dome tweeter. So it's not beryllium, it's not like something crazy exotic. It's a silk dome tweeter, and it's a 2-way speaker. It's a floor stander, but it only has 2 drivers, a 1-inch tweeter and I believe a 7-inch mid/woofer that handles the mid-range and the woofer, right? So just 2 drivers in this rock enclosed enclosure. And it costs like $26,000 or $27,000. It's not a cheap speaker at all. But it's super heavy, and it's a complete different setup from the other speakers, so keep that in mind. And by the way, the Akora was in a separate room. It's the only speaker I listened to that was in a separate room. This room actually had even higher end preamp, amplifier, DAC, and streamer. everything here was several times the cost of the main room that I was listening to stuff. So keep that in mind as well. So back into the main room, I also listened to the Magico A5s, like I mentioned. That setup is a 1-inch beryllium tweeter and I believe it's a 7-inch, 6 or 7-inch. I'll put links to these speakers so you can get the full specs in the video, but it's a 6 or 7-inch mid-range, and then it also has, I think it's 7-inch mid-range, and it also has 3, count them, 3 8-inch woofers. So this was kind of not fair because this speaker setup was definitely a lot more bass heavy, had a lot more drivers to help to push the bass out, and just keep that in mind as well when I talk about my feedback. And then finally, like I said, I had a quick listen to the B&W new D4 Diamond Series, the 804, the smaller one. This is a 1-inch diamond encoded tweeter with a 5-inch mid-range and 2 7-inch woofers. So in order of how I listen to it, the Paradigm Persona 5F, the way I would describe the Persona sound is it's lively, it's pretty forward, and that could be a good or bad thing. Persona has this rep right now among the audiophile community of being overly bright and harsh sounding. The tweeter is just too bright. You can't listen to it at a loud level. It's fatiguing to the ears. I've listened to Persona, like I said, 20 plus times, the whole line from the bookshelf up to the 9Hs. I've never thought of them as harsh or overly bright. I will say that, and listening to them closer now compared to the other speakers, they are more forward. They're not entirely neutral. They are definitely a little bit more forward, but that makes the music sound a little bit more lively, and the sound stage is a little bit more enveloping. So nothing quite sounded like the Paradigm Persona, for better or worse. That mid-range beryllium mid-range is really fast and really transparent in the tweeter. So the sound was the most forward. It sounded like there was nothing in between you and the sound. No veil, no coloration whatsoever, which is the point of the Persona. And I get that. Like, I can hear that. And everything sounded hyper detailed, hyper clean, but it was more engaging. It was more holographic in the sound stage. Like, it almost sounded like a surround sound experience, almost, just coming from the 2 channels. It was the most like that out of all the speakers I heard. So that's the Persona. The 5Fs just is lacking a little bit of the oomph in that mid bass and the lower end bass, even with the 3 7-inch woofers, which, by the way, is the same configuration as my my Studio 100 V4s that I have at home. 3 7-inch woofers, 1 7-inch mid-range, the same setup. But even with that, definitely going to need a subwoofer to fill in that sound, and that's the general takeaway. The bass is fast, the bass is accurate. It's there, but it's not like really, it doesn't sound like a full sound, across the frequency band when you listen to that. The next speaker I listen to is the Sopra N2. The Sopras are a very special speaker. I've always said that. I've listened to the Sopra again a dozen times over the years. My first thought was, overall, it sounded much more complete. It wasn't nearly as forward as the Persona. The soundstage was a little bit more laid back, but the sound was overall a lot more neutral and balanced from high to low. The low end was actually really impressive. 2 7-inch woofers in that. It was really full body. Like, I would almost venture to say you can definitely listen to that without a subwoofer. Really full body, way more full body bass than the 5Fs. But again, I'm looking at the 7Fs, which is a huge step up in terms of the bass response for the Persona line, by the way. But again, it's hard to demo that. But so I'm just keeping that in mind. But yeah, the N2 versus the 5Fs, the N2 had a much fuller sound, a more complete sound, I would say. And my initial thought was that, again, blindfolded, no bias, independent of the brands, the Sopra N2 sounded better. And I've thought of that before. I went back and listened to the Persona again a second time because we were trying to narrow it down. And my thought was that, again, the Persona does sound more forward. It's a little bit like not neutral in that regard. But it also, to me, made the music more enjoyable because it wasn't overly harsh at all. It wasn't bright to my ears. but it made the presentation sound a little bit more lively and made the sound a little bit more engaging. And even though the Sopra was probably more accurate, but this is where it gets subjective. To me, when I went back and was just kind of listening, I'm just like, I was enjoying the Persona sound a little bit more. Both sound great, detail was out the wazoo, resolution, the imaging was pinpoint, but it was definitely a different sound between the two. And I would say I couldn't go wrong either way just on the sound. But I was kind of like, yeah, I still kind of like that Persona sound. So that was kind of my takeaway there. Now, the next speaker I listened to was the Akura Acoustics. And this is really interesting. Never heard these before. Like I said, silk dome tweeter versus beryllium for everything else, except for diamond for the B&W. And then a two-way. So just a single 7-inch mid/woofer was in there with much higher end electronics. So in the main room, I'm listening to JC1, two JC1 monoblocks from Parasound. I'm listening to the Parasound preamp as well, the Halo preamp. And in this other room, there was, I think it's called sorry, I forget the name. I'll put a link in there, but it's super high end. We're talking like $20,000 preamp, and like $30,000+ amplifiers in there, monoblocks. Much higher end equipment. My takeaway here was that despite the huge differences in technology, the two-way versus three-way, the beryllium that's lacking, and all the other high-end electronics in that room, the overall sound sounded about on par. Like they all sounded great. This particular speaker didn't sound particularly better or more special. It didn't. I mean, it sounded great. It was nothing that I took away from there where I was like, wow, like I don't know what this is, whether it's the electronics or the speaker, but there's something here that's just missing in, like these the Sopra and the Persona and the Parasound equipment that I need to get here. I didn't come away feeling that, right? It was just like this again, I would think on paper that, this speaker might not sound quite as accurate, might not sound quite as detailed, but it did. It sounded like very much on par with the Sopra and the Parasound and the Paradigm, despite, again, this silk dome tweeter and this one single woofer for everything. The bass was actually really good. It was still better to me, believe it or not, than the 3 7-inch woofers in the 5F for the Persona. It was definitely closer to the Sopra in terms of the overall full bodiness of the sound, which was like really surprising. So it's a great sound speaker. I'll get into other reasons why it would not be for me, but it's a great sounding speaker, no question, right? So that was the Acora Acoustics. Interesting. Glad I had a chance to listen to it. The next speaker I listened to was the Magico A5. I've heard Magico before, not the A series, which is still fairly new, but I've heard the S series, which is the higher end one that's like, again, $50,000 and more. Before, I've even heard the M series in the past as well, which is like their $100,000 plus speakers. And my takeaway from Magico before, even with the S series and the M series, is and largely is consistent with the A series, is that what Magico is really doing is they're putting in high quality driver, materials, high quality engineering. Their main thing that they're pushing, why they're so expensive though, is with the chassis, right? They are building these chassis that are made out of like steel, like aluminum, full on metal, to make the chassis and super rigid to remove any kind of coloration that can come from the cabinet that's going to affect your sound. That's kind of like what their unique thing is, right? They use beryllium tweeters. That's not really unique. At the higher end level, they use like beryllium and diamond. That's somewhat unique, but they use beryllium tweeters. They use high-end materials, really stiff materials for the bass and the mid-range, just high quality engineering all around. But if it wasn't for the cabinet with the actual steel aluminum enclosures, the price would probably be a lot more in line with like B&W and Paradigm, for example. But that's their main thing. Now, the question is, what is that extra weight? What is that extra rigidness? What does that extra metal in the cabinet really do to the sound? And my answer to that is, I've always come away from every Magico speaker I've listened to and said it sounds really good. But what I'm saying is that they don't sound special enough to warrant their cost, in my opinion. Because generally speaking, they offer the same level of technology and engineering that you might find in Revel, Ultima, and B&W, and Paradigm now, and these other brands, Wilson Audio, Focal, right, as well. But they're generally charged higher for what you get, and it's like, well, why? They're paying. You got to pay for that material they're using for the cabinets. But I just haven't heard that actually make an impact in the sound. The A5 sounds good. It didn't sound noticeably better to my ears than the Sopra or the Persona. Again, it sounded like it belonged for sure. And these had 3 8-inch woofers that were meant to almost be a full range speaker, pretty much. They can go down to, as Magico rates them, down to like below 25 hertz. They're rated. But the interesting thing was, it didn't sound that much more full body than the Sopra. It wasn't like, oh my God, it's so much more bass, as you would expect for that configuration. So again, not a bad sounding speaker. If it's something that you're interested in and you like, I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying, to me, the 2 biggest things that I have with the A5 is, and I'll get more into this later, but is it just doesn't sound special. And I don't like the aesthetics. To me, it's an ugly looking speaker. It's really, really plain. Again, what are you paying for? The A5 is like, again, $26,000, $27,000. Aesthetically, it doesn't have a modern look. It looks it's boxy. It just looks very plain. It's just not a very attractive looking speaker to my eyes. So the last speaker I listened to was the B&W 804 D4, the new Diamond series. This is interesting to me. So for context, B&W for me, and I've listened to a lot of the D2. When I lived in Portland area, there was a shop out there that was pretty close to my house that I used to go to probably like every other month or so. And their main speaker line was B&W. So I got a chance to listen to like the D2 series quite a bit. The 802s, particularly the 800s I listened to, 803s over the years, and then a little bit of the D3 as well. I have never been really impressed with the B&W. I always felt that they were a bit overpriced for what the sound quality was. And aesthetically, they were not for me. They have a very unique look, don't get me wrong, but just not my cup of tea. So I was never really, that's kind of been my thing, my hang up with the B&W. As soon as the first note hit, I was like, wow. I was actually impressed. The first note hit and I was like, this sounds way better than what I remember the Diamond series sounded like from my ears. There is a fairly big jump going from the 804 to the 803. The 803 is when you start getting that separate compartment for the mid-range as well, which adds a bit to more mid-range detail, etc. And then of course you just get bigger woofers. So it is a nice jump, so it may sound different, but this sounded really good. Like immediately my thought was, yeah, this speaker belongs with these other speakers. It definitely sounded like that. The sound was really detailed. Again, it was also pretty transparent. I didn't hear a lot of the coloration I'm used to hearing before. It still was a little bit more veiled than the Persona, for example, and even the Sopra a little bit, but it was really, really close. Overall, I was impressed. I'm supposed to be going back to try to hear the 802s once they get that sorted out there, and I'm looking forward to that. But if you're interested in the Diamond, my initial impression, I didn't listen to it quite as long as the other ones, but my initial impression is that it's definitely improved and it's somewhat of a winner. My overall takeaway was this. For one, you can't go wrong with any of these speakers, man. Sound is subjective. Everyone's ears are different. I'm older. My ears are different than they were 20 years ago, right? 10 years ago. So things that I might have heard and how things may have come across to me may be different. Sound is subjective, but I can definitely tell that the overall quality of all of these speakers was something, these are world-class things. To be honest, it's not about going wrong. You can go for something that's maybe not perfect for you, not quite your taste, but these all sounded great. I'm not gonna lie. They all had a slightly different signature, and that's really what it comes down to. It's whether that's your taste or not. But I was, surprised honestly at how similar it all sounded. Again, could be my ears, right? It's about the overall package, right? And the package is more than just the sound. I'll get to that. But in terms of the sound, it all sounded really similar to me. I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of hard with sound though, right? Because the A and B's take time. So your brain, you hear it, and you have a short-term retention. So you hear a speaker, it takes 5 minutes or so to swap it out, bring in a new speaker, rewire it, everything. The new speaker comes on, and I'm listening to the same tracks on the same equipment. So it's, and I'm just like, wow, that sounds really good too. And I'm listening, I'm looking for differences. And you think about the different equipment. Here's the other takeaway. The overall quality in terms of the room and the acoustics, I listened to the 2 different rooms with 2 very different speakers and very different setups. We're talking separate, that other system was probably 5 times the price, 3 to 5 times the price. And again, like I said, it sounded pretty close. It sounded pretty much on par with what I heard in that first room. It was amazing to me that speaker with a silk tweeter and 1 single woofer / mid-range was able to give a full, complete sound that to me rivaled the Sopras. That was amazing. That's a credit to Acora's, speaker. And the higher one actually does have, believe it or not, does have a beryllium tweeter, the higher source floor standard, and it has an additional woofer to make it a 3-way. So I can only imagine what that sounds like. But this one sounded pretty impressive as well. That's kind of my takeaway, is that these all sounded great. They all sounded pretty similar. And based on sound quality alone, can't go wrong. And it was hard to really pull out a winner. The thing for me is that, thinking about which speakers to purchase is more than just sound quality, believe it or not. That should be the most important thing, don't get me wrong. But it's more than just sound quality. For me, aesthetics matter. I want a speaker that looks like something that when I look at it, I'm like, wow. And other people could come in and again, at this point, this price point, it's kind of making a statement where people say, well, that clearly looks like something, but just having a nice aesthetic to fit the room. These speakers for me are meant to bring a world-class 2-channel music experience capability to my home theater. This is not a dedicated 2-channel room, and that matters a lot because there's a lot of brands like Akura Acoustics that are purely building 2-channel music-oriented speakers. And I talked about that on my channel, right? Already about music and versus home theater. And it matters in terms of even how you design speakers and how you design equipment. But there are companies out there doing that. And those speakers would be great if you're just listening to music. But if you're trying to actually integrate them into a home theater, no. So for example, Acora doesn't even make a center channel speaker or surround speakers or anything. That's not what they do. That's not what they're about. So immediately that would not be an option for me, for example. Some companies focus more on home theater than others. Parasound and B&W clearly focus on home theater. They have multiple center channels, subwoofers, bookshelves / surround speakers. They clearly, and Parasound and Anthem make processors and amplifiers, and receivers, right? Anthem has and Parasound has the perfect bass kit for tuning your bass. They have the Anthem room correction for the processing. I mean, they are really invested in overall home theater room, and that's kind of why I like Parasound, because they're a great balance of both. And now with the Persona, they have these world-class speakers that can stomp with the big dogs when it comes to music, but they also focus on home theater as well. B&W does as well. Focal does, they have a wide range at the Sopra level, not as much. Sopra is clearly designed for music. They do have a center. They do have a surround speaker. It's not really designed for the Sopra, but it just has the same equipment, same drivers and technology. But they don't focus on it. That much is clear. Magico, technically, they have like a center speaker and a bookshelf that they make with the A line, right? But again, they're not really thinking about home theater at all. They technically do. They have a subwoofer, I believe, as well. So it's there. They know people are going to use it, especially at the A series with the price range. They don't necessarily have that for once you get it higher up in their line. They don't have like home theater stuff. That kind of makes sense. But that's a big consideration. So like I said, B&W and Parasound would definitely be the top 2 out of these brands when it comes to home theater. Another consideration is the availability. So Magico is a really boutique brand that's not available everywhere. In fact, you know, Dave mentioned that if I was to order the Magico, it probably would take about 3 to 4 months for it to ship and get in. Whereas if I ordered the Parasound for Persona, even though he doesn't have it in stock, I probably will have it within a week. You know, B&W probably within a week. You know, that kind of matters too, right? When you think about support, if something happened with your speaker, you want to be able to go to take it to like an authorized dealer that's local to you. You probably almost in every city, major city, you're gonna find a dealer that works with Paradigm. You're gonna find a dealer that works with B&W. You're maybe not gonna find a dealer that works with Magico. You're not gonna find a dealer that works with Akura. You may or may not find a dealer that works with Focal. Focal is pretty readily available at this point, but not necessarily in their upper lines, right? So it can be tricky. So putting all of that together, man, for me, you know, the Persona line is still winning out. Like I said, it was Paradigm's game to lose, unless I heard something that just sounded amazing. And again, I wanted to do due diligence and to hear these other competitors. But again, so far I haven't. Nothing sounded that much better. It sounded different in some ways, better. Like I said, more accurate, more complete sounding than the 5Fs. And again, the 7Fs may correct a lot of the weaknesses I already pointed out with the 5Fs, right? Potentially. Bigger sound, more complete sound stage while still having that hyper accuracy and detail and transparency. So for me, the Persona is still winning out. And I love the aesthetics. To me, the Persona is the best looking speaker of all of these. The B&W looks better, but again, it's especially the 802, 803, not my cup of tea. The Focal is probably a close second. The Sopra looks interesting, looks unique. It looks like something. It definitely makes a statement. I just personally like the more conventional yet modern and elegant look of the Persona. My personal taste. If you're considering any of those speakers, go for it. Can't go wrong. Try to audition it yourself. Listen to it on equipment that sounds similar to yours. But don't sleep on Paradigm, man. The Personas are great speakers. They're up there. They're competing, man, with any of those speakers that are in that $30,000 range. And yeah, I am just super excited to when I'm able to finally make the plunge and kind of really invest in my in-game speakers. That's the heart of my system. That will be the heart of my system going forward. Thanks a lot. Like, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what would be your dream speakers? You know, what would be your in-game speakers? And what speakers are you rocking now? What do you think of them? How do you evaluate speakers for yourself? You know, have you heard any of the speakers that I've listened to here? And what did you think of them? Magico, B&W, etc. So let me know, guys. Talk to me. I'm looking forward to it. But until next video, thanks a lot.